Okay, thank you. सभी को नमस्कार। केंद्रीय माध्यमिक शिक्षा बोर्ड की ओर से आज इस कार्यक्रम में जुड़ने वाले सभी अध्यापकों, विद्यालय प्रधानाचार्यों, सीबीएसई के ऑफिसर्स आप सभी का स्वागत है। Good afternoon. I welcome you to the CBSE webinar on competency-based question development. In this webinar, we are delighted that teachers from the science fraternity, school heads, assessment experts, CBSE officers, all have joined to come together. Through this webinar, we would like to initiate a discussion on competency-based questions, why such questions are important, how to go about developing these questions. So I'll request my IT team to kindly put on the presentation before we proceed ahead. Thank you. Next slide पे चलते हैं. So today's webinar would be centered around, the discussions would be centered around competency-based education and assessments, CBSE Term 1 examination, the structure, Bloom's taxonomy and the blueprint, and why it is critical to development and designing of the question paper, and the key principles for designing the questions. Now, before I proceed, I'll quickly introduce you to myself as well as my co-panelist. So I'm Shweta Singh. I'm a Joint Secretary here at the CBSE Academic Unit. Essentially, I'm a science educator and I'm handling the science education portfolio here. Besides me, we have Hemlata ji. Hemlata Srinivasan is from Army Public School, Delhi Can. She's a very, very seasoned teacher and she has been supporting a number of CBSE initiatives. We are also fortunate to have experts from educational initiatives. We have Dr. Gayatri Vaid, AVP from Educational Initiatives. She has very deep understanding about the intricacies of developing assessment items. Besides this, we have Ms. Sudeshna Roy from Lead Education Specialist from EI. She brings a wealth of experience from the school teaching scenario to the platform. So welcome everybody. Moving to the first agenda of CBE, what competency-based education is and what is assessment that is aligned to it. But before proceeding to it, I want to begin with the cautious note here. Developing good quality assessment is a very, very time-consuming process. So that means teachers have to be engaged in this exercise. They have to be engrossed in this whole thing. They have to do it. They also have to work together with other experts from the field. So the questions developed, a lot of peer review is involved, a lot of discussions, modifications, and it is only after that we get good quality questions. So this is a process, this is a skill which one learns and hones over a period of time. It does not happen instantly. So I would like to encourage all the teachers who are joining us, all the school heads who are joining us, to look for opportunities where you can work in collaborative groups to develop questions and assessment items, review them with each other and proceed so. So moving ahead to the next slide. We draw our inspiration from the National Policy of Education 2020, which is a transformational document. It has shown directions to all of us. From the perspective of school education, it talks about some things which are core to the educative process, very simple, but very, very critical things. So it talks about a shift from rote memorization skills to competency-based education. It mandates that the primary focus of assessment should be for learning. It also talks about transforming assessments to focus on core skills, that is testing of higher order skills of analysis, critical thinking, and conceptual clarity. Now, what does competency-based education is? What are its key principles? What does it mean for a teacher? So the key principles, if I talk about, there are 4 main points to it. The first thing is that it involves authentic, meaningful, and positive learning experience for the child. So as a teacher, it is important for you to build real-world context for the learner, to give the learner opportunities to solve problems from the community and the society, to link whatever is being taught from the curriculum to whatever is there in the surrounding. Besides that, there is a visible demonstration of learning outcomes. So whatever curriculum outcomes are considered important, it is critical that the learner and each and every learner should demonstrate an achievement of those LOs. Progression is based on the proficiency of attaining those objectives and not on the time. Besides that, self-paced and individualized learning is a core principle. So that means a teacher has to design her learning strategies, her pedagogy to the diversity of the classroom. So your approach should include multiple strategies which would be appropriate, which would be apt for different types of learners. I also want to emphasize that when we adopt a competency-based education, a competency-based pedagogy in the classroom, we must be conscious that there has to be a constructive alignment between the three key areas, the three key pivots of the educative process: the learning outcomes, the teaching and learning activities, as well as assessment. So by this, we mean that constructive aspect is that the student should be constructing meanings through relevant learning activities. And also there should be an alignment between whatever the teacher does to create a conducive learning environment, whatever strategy he or she is adopting, to the learning outcomes of the curriculum. So I would also like to give you one example of a competency-based assessment item. I'll just pause for a second while you take a look at the visual. So this is from class 10th. The chapter is life processes. I think chapter 6, science, if I correctly remember. And if you look at the question says, which statement is supported by the diagram? There are four options. The first being all arteries carry oxygenated blood. Second is capillaries are permeable to gases. C is the wall between the left and the right ventricle is porous. And the last one is blood can flow back and forth between the right atrium and the right ventricle. So what immediately comes to the mind with respect to this assessment item is that the question is presented in the form of a situation, in the form of a visual, which is presented, which is evident for the learners. It also demands an application of knowledge. Multiple aspects of this process of this life process have been integrated in the form of either the key, which is the correct answer, as well as the distractors. Moving ahead to the next slide, where another example is given to you. So it poses a situation for the learners. It says that which of these will be the immediate effect if gaseous exchange in the lung capillaries reduce. So I will just pause for a few seconds while you have the time to go through the options. So if you can see that this is a novel situation for the learner, it is a situation which is not picked up from the textbook. The learner is compelled to think and apply whatever he or she has learned, the concepts learned to this question to solve the problem, a hypothetical situation, a hypothetical problem. I also want to emphasize that this is a very good example of a case-based question where the learner does not have to read a big, longish narrative. The visual is there to support the learner, and lots of content is given as cues to the learner. Now, moving ahead to the next portion is, I also want to talk about what at the CBSE we have been doing. We have been working at various fronts to align the curriculum, the pedagogy, and assessments for competency-based education. We started around a couple of years earlier with the adoption of the NCERT learning outcomes. Besides that, we have brought in a series of changes in the assessment procedure, especially in the class 10th and 12th board examination. So diverse formats of questions were introduced in 2019. So in the board examination of March 2020, there was a time when case-based questions, assertion reasoning questions, a few multiple choice questions were introduced. Besides that, slowly we have been including more competency-based questions from the academic session 2019-2020 onwards. Massive capacity building exercise has been initiated by our training unit, by our centers of excellence. We have also designed certain MOOCs which the teachers can access from the Diksha portal. Besides this, we have partnered with experts from various fields, both government and non-government. to create a host of resources. So during the last 2 years, we have partnered with British Council, with Sri Aurobindo Society, Azim Premji University, Central Square Foundation, educational initiatives, think tank, and a few other organizations. During this whole time period, we have created a lot of resources. Some of these resources have been put together in the form of a competency-based education microsite, which is a part of the CBSE academic website. So I'll encourage the teachers to go and access various resources there, use those as it is, modify it, and mold it to your situation, to your context. Now, when we talk about a question paper, a good quality question paper, there are two aspects which are very, very important, the validity as well as the reliability. The validity of the question paper actually measures the attainment of the learning outcome. So by this, we mean that there is a purpose for which a particular tool, a particular question paper has been designed, whether that purpose is being met or not. Through this, we decide whether the question paper is valid. So when we talk about, let's say, term 1 assessment examination, we'll say if the learning outcomes of the science curriculum for term 1 are being addressed by a particular question paper, then the question paper is valid. Also, a valid paper should be able to distinguish between those students who have mastered a set of LOs from the curriculum with the students who have not been able to master this. Now, in terms of reliability, we are not concerned with the intent of the tool, with why that tool has been designed. We are rather interested in the fact that whether the test which is used produces reliable results, reliable data, reliable information over a period of time. Now, there are certain mechanisms through which we can ensure that our paper is both valid as well as reliable. So a few of them is adherence to the learning outcomes which have been stated in the curriculum, to the assessment frameworks, having a balanced blueprint, having good quality assessment items, and having good quality marking schemes. We will be talking about all these aspects in the latter half of this webinar today. Now, with respect to term 1 assessments and how it is going to be, the details of it, for this academic session 2021-2022, largely because of the pandemic, the academic session has been divided into 2 terms with approximately 50% syllabus for each term, term 1 and term 2. Each term would be followed by an examination. Term 1 examination would be MCQ based, 90 minutes paper. On the other hand, the term 2 assessment would be a 120-minute paper with different formats of questions. So this was notified sometimes in July 21. Now for term 1, the exam duration, as I've already said, is 90 minutes. Additional time in the range of 15 to 20 minutes would be provided for each subject so that the students have ample time to read through the question paper. It will be a totally MCQ-based assessment. 20 to 25% additional questions would be there in each sections for learners to exercise their choice. Now, these will not be choices, internal choices. That means you would not have questions that attempt question 14A or 14B. Rather, there would be a set of questions in each section, and the students would be asked to attempt X number of questions in each section. Besides this, 20% case-based questions would be incorporated in at class 10 and 10% at class 12. Now, just to break the monotony of this presentation, I have a set of statements, and I will request Sudeshna to help me figure these out. I will read these statements and ask Sudeshna whether she agrees with me or disagrees, or she has a mixed opinion. So the first one is open-ended questions are easier to construct than objective items. Sudeshna, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you so much. Now, when we are talking about objective items, there can be a host of different types of objective items. But since we are focusing on MCQs here, I think when we go through this entire discussion today, it would come across that constructing multiple choice questions actually is much, much more difficult. And obviously, there are different reasons which will be coming across to the audience. So I think I agree to this. Yeah,
Correct. Even I believe that creating a good quality MCQ is more challenging.
very difficult.
So we all need to be prepared for this task ahead. The
Absolutely.
second statement, assessments with open-ended questions require more thorough student preparation and study time than objective examination or than a question paper which has objective assessments.
So I'll request Gayatri, maybe Gayatri, your take on this.
I think overall, if since we are discussing competency-based education, I think the way the textbooks are designed and the way we are approaching our classroom instructions and practices, the time taken for any assessment in terms of preparation should not be different. And that's the case in this case too. So whether the student appears for a preparation which is more objective type or of more essay type questions test, I think the overall time still remains the same. We need to just help children focus on concepts.
Correct.
That's important.
I think this is especially true if we talk about good quality assessment tools, good quality papers. Moving forward to the third statement, only having open-ended questions limits the extent of content covered.
Uh, So when we are talking about questions being tested in an assessment, I think I agree and disagree both on this statement, because ultimately we are focusing on the conceptual understanding that children have, and what kind of items we create is completely in the question creator's hands. And so whether we are creating open-ended questions or we are creating multiple choice questions or objective, I can easily cover any part of the content that I want. Gayatri, anything that you want to add here?
So
I think that's it.
So I believe that if we ensure that we have a balanced blueprint, we can address any concern if we feel out here. So whether it is an MCQ based paper or whether it has open-ended questions, if we try to balance the content areas, I think we can do a fair enough job. The next statement is open-ended questions and objective items can be used to measure the same content, the same abilities, and the same LOs.
Yeah, I think we are going to go into this much more depth as we move forward. And a lot of people might believe that while MCQs are not able to always test certain cognitive levels in Bloom's taxonomy, etc., I think a lot of myths will be broken when we talk of that. So they can both actually test all kinds of content and ability.
Correct. Agree with you. And the last statement is that open-ended questions and objective items are both good ways to evaluate a student's level of knowledge.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So
Gayatri?
we all agree with this, I think. So just to conclude, we can say that either it is an open-ended or an objective assessment item. Both of them can be used to measure almost any important educational achievement which a pen paper, a written test can measure. We can test understanding and ability to apply principles through both these mechanisms. We can test ability to think critically and also test the ability to solve problems. Now, the last 4 or 5 slides of my presentation focus on the technical quality of a test. So this is just actually an overview of how we assess whether a test instrument, a question paper is of good quality or not. This will be covered in detail by Hemlata ji and by Gayatri ji. So the first is cognitive complexity, that is the test questions to focus on appropriate intellectual activity which range from simple recall of facts to problem solving to critical thinking to reasoning. So that means a good quality assessment tool should have a range of cognitive abilities which are assessed through that paper. The next is the content quality, the test questions to permit students to demonstrate their knowledge of challenging and important subject area. So as teachers, we intuitively know that in this given chapter, in this content, these are the critical areas. These are the important things which it is a must for the students to know, for our learners to acquire. So those questions should be assessed in a test paper. It is important that we focus our attention on those and rather not pick up mundane facts from the chapter or the textbook to create our questions. The next thing is meaningful. So when a student goes into the examination hall to give a question paper, to appear in a question paper and comes back, he or she should think that it is worth my time and energy. So they should recognize the value of this assessment. Besides that, language appropriate, the language, whether it is in terms of instructions, whether it is in terms of the question itself, it should be very, very clear, lucid, appropriate, very clear directions, no excessive reading load should be there in the question paper. The next is transfer and generalizability. So a successful performance of a student on the test should allow me as a teacher, me as an educator, to make valid generalizations of the student's achievement in terms of the curricular LOs. Fairness, so that means each student, we have a diversity of students, they should find the assessment, the question paper, a fair instrument, the way it is being designed in terms of language, in terms of the context, in terms of questions, should be appropriate. It should not be advantages or disadvantages to a learner coming from any background, from any region of the country, from a rural or an urban space. Also, the scoring key, the marking scheme should be equitable. And the last is the reliability, which we spoke about earlier also. Answers to test questions should be consistent. They can be trusted over a period of time. They should represent what the student knows. So here I end my presentation, and I would like to invite Hemlata ji. Please bear with us while we upload her presentation, and she can proceed with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the warm welcome. And I'm really thankful to CBSE for providing me the opportunity to present my views. Good evening, everyone present here and even the audience over YouTube. And first of all, I would like to start with the quote that assessment, it is just an engine which drives students' learning. For making good assessment, we need good guidelines in the form of blueprint. I would like to start with blueprint and its significance, followed by Bloom's taxonomy, MCQ types and structure. Next slide, please. Next slide. A blueprint, it is a guide for making basically a question paper, an assessment item. These blueprints, they provide conceptual map of examination format, content area, as well as the assessment of test specification. It is used to determine which aspect of the domain which we are going to sample for a particular assessment. It also helps us to match various competencies with the course content as well as the modality of various assessments. And this, to conclude, this blueprint basically it acts as a valid tool to align objectives with assessment, and it also helps in distribution of appropriate weightage and questions across the topics. Next slide. Blueprint, it should be an integral part of the assessment, and it should align to the learning objectives as well as whatever the competency that is being tested and the weightage of that particular competency. It helps in distribution. This is what we mean. And next slide. This is the sample blueprint. Sample blueprint. This is only just a sample. Teachers, according to their testing areas, they can change their own format. In this format, 40% weightage it has been given to the knowledge and understanding competency, whereas application, analysis and synthesis it has been given 40%, and then case-based questions it has been given 20% competency. And here, out of 24 questions, that is in section A, only 20 questions, first 20 questions the children are supposed to answer. And whereas in section B also out of 24, 20 questions they are required to answer. In case-based question, out of 12 questions, they are required to answer only 10. Total out of 60, only 50 to be attempted. Next slide, please. This is the competency and the suggestive verbs as per the Bloom's taxonomy for to test various competencies. Like to demonstrate knowledge, we use state, name, list, identify, suggest, describe, outline, etc. Similarly, for application of knowledge or concepts while making any question, while preparing any test item, it is better, so it is suggested to use these words: calculate, illustrate, show, adapt, etc. and analyze, so on. Next slide. Bloom's taxonomy. It is if one accepts the idea that teaching is for understanding, application, analysis, evaluation, creation, rather than knowledge. It will bring students to a higher level of learning. The question of hierarchical plan for conceptualization arises here. This would be a monumental task for an educator to undertake. Fortunately, we have already such a plan. It is existing in the form of Bloom's taxonomy. Benjamin Bloom developed this, and all the educators, they are well aware of this Bloom's taxonomy. The series is based on degrees of difficulty. That means in the recent version of this Bloom's taxonomy, it is from that is remember to knowledge to remembering, understanding. That is the words, they have been changed from noun to verb. It allows the instructor to gauge the level of questions that an instructor can ask for the exams. For example, if the question on a test are to ask the students to identify a structure defined in a sentence or to show a graphic representation, the instructor should be knowing whichever the level he or she is testing. Next slide. For this example, basically in this, just it is a question, MCQ question. MCQs can be used to test any competency, either from remember to create. Vaccination was discovered by. This is only a simple direct recall question. That means children will be answering A, B, C, D, whatever the options given to him or her. This is a simple basic recall question. Next slide, please. On the other hand, students, they can be also asked to interpret a graph or to predict what will happen if any situation is given, or if certain event was to continue, what the child is going to predict, what the child is going to think, how he is going to think. Would realize the question, it would require more of thinking of students, and basically it comes under the level 2, that is comprehension or understanding. In this question, this is a very interesting question. I would like to just moment to read this. These two balls P and Q of different sizes are dropped in a cup of water. They both float as shown in the figure. What can be said about these balls? That means this is basically purely understanding or comprehension based question. That means which material these balls are made up of. That means based on the figure, the understanding it occurs. That is P is lighter than Q. Option B, it is P is heavier than Q. Option C, P and Q are of the same weight. D, we cannot say which ball is heavier based on this information. That means this is purely how the child's thought process it proceeds. It follows the chain of events. Next slide. Similarly, a question which requires students to clarify or illustrate a statement, it can be even more difficult to answer, but the level, it can be pushed to the next level, that is application level. In this application level, if at all, here we are using complex type MCQ. Reina observed that stain, this is a question from sample question paper, stain of curry on white shirt becomes reddish brown when the soap is scrubbed on it, but it turns yellow again when the shirt is washed with plenty of water. What might be the reason for her observation? That means the child should be aware of the nature of the soap as well as the details of the indicator. What exactly is an indicator? What is the function of the indicator? How it behaves in acidic or basic medium? That means there is some sort of comprehension as well as interrelation it is being taken between these two statements. That means two concepts like nature as well as indicators. Next question. Next question. Yeah. Multiple choice questions can be written even for remembering, for understanding, application, analysis, evaluate, and create. Any form, as already Shweta ma'am mentioned, that in any form we can write this multiple choice questions, but only thing is proper care should be taken while constructing these items. Basically, while we are constructing these higher level questions like analyze, evaluate, and create. That is level 4 analysis. It generally what it makes, it urges the students to break down what is asked and examine the meaning of the various sections. That means in this analysis level, for example, the real image of a candle flame formed by a lens is 3 times the size of the flame, and the distance between the lens and image is 80 centimeter. at what distance should the candle be placed from the lens? That means this is typically an analysis question where the child is going to understand where should be the size of the image, where should be the size of the object, and the candle flame where it should be. And this is typically because the child is going to break down the particular content into different smaller parts, and is going to examine and understand the types or position of the image font. And this analysis level, students, we can ask them to select the least important incidents from the list of occurrences. We can give list of occurrences. Which one do you think is the least important incident? Or what is the reason for your thought process? That means why it is least important. That means in this particular analysis, it is little bit tougher, providedly if consciously made, constructed. This item, it can be easily determined that particular child's, it can bring out the child's levels of learning. That is from lower level to higher level. Next slide. And this is evaluation, how we are going to evaluate. That means this is a beautiful question. That means we are going to give a situation and we are going to ask the child to evaluate what are the pros and cons. Situation based question. In these figures, basically the gray part represents the part that can be seen by both eyes at a time, whereas the white part, it represents those parts that can be seen only one at a time. Next slide. Animal 1 and 2, that means they are having two different areas, that is vision, how it can see with both the eyes as well as one eye. This particular evaluation level, it encourages students to combine question elements for a solid understanding. That means whatever that is learned, it will be analyzed and then processed. And finally, the evaluation is the stage where that solid understanding it occurs. Under this level, that is under this evaluation level of Bloom's taxonomy, we can ask, that means as science teachers, we can ask which of the following elements could be constructed when all the gases in the atmosphere, that means they are mixed or they are combined. This is a kind of evaluation level. It is the highest order, higher order thinking skills questions can be created. Next slide. This is a very typical and interesting question. Basically, this is an interesting question where creation, it can be, we can see the level of creation amongst children. If such type of questions, that means which is balanced with visuals, which is balanced. That means Aarti sees that Kulfi pot on the street is wrapped in a red cloth. She thinks that the red cloth helps in maintaining a lower temperature inside the pot. She wants to know whether it is the cloth itself, the red color of the cloth, or both, which help in achieving this effect. For this, she plans to take identical pots with equal amounts of water, put them in the sun for 2 hours and measures their temperature. That means here where the creation level it is coming, the child is doing, performing the activity, hands-on experience, that means learning by doing. It is the highest level of learning. For this create level, that means questions should be of higher order. Teachers should consciously make efforts to prepare such levels so that the learners will be motivating from simple lower levels to higher levels of learning. Next slide. Questions such as these, next slide. While difficult to construct, they can be graded as efficiently as test items from lower categories to higher categories by simply changing the difficulty level. Now let us understand what are these multiple choice questions. These multiple choice questions can be easily constructed with conscious effort. Again and again, I'm stressing on this word conscious effort. That is from simple to complex questions. Well-designed multiple choice questions allows testing from wide breadth of the content and objectives, and also provide objectivity of the student ability as well as the testing for student ability while aligning with all the learning outcomes. These items, they can be written to assess various levels of outcomes from basic recall to application, analysis and evaluation, because students are choosing from a set of potential answers in the form of options. Next slide, please. Basic structure of this MCQ is basically any multiple choice question. It has one basic stem. It is basically composed of two parts. One is stem, the other one is options or alternatives. The stem, it defines or identifies the question or a problem, and a set of alternatives are also known as options or possible answers. It should contain a key. Key is the most, that means best answer to the question, we call it as key. In this particular question, if that is Roma has 3 solid balls, all of equal weight, the sizes of the 3 balls are as shown in the below. That is this particular, this is known as the stem or the problem along with the figure. If ball 2 sinks in water, which of the other balls will definitely sink in water? That means this completely, it comes under the question stem. And these are options A, B, C, D. These alternatives or plausible answers, these options, they consist of key also as well as distractors. And generally, it is better to have 3 to 4 options. It is ideal to have 4 options. 4 options in this. There are many advantages of using MCQs for an assessment. One key advantage which I feel that means it is easy to mark as well as it can be scored even by a computer. This is what these days it is very easy, especially during the pandemic time. Next question. These multiple choice questions, next slide please. These MCQs, basically they are the test items. They are so versatile and can be written to assess various levels of learning outcomes. Okay, and they are further classified into different types: basic simple MCQs, complex MCQs or branched MCQs, assertion reasoning questions, and case-based questions that include MCQs. Next slide. Simple MCQs. In this simple MCQ, that means a scenario or a source of the question, it is given along with 4 options. This, it can be used directly just to recall, for analysis, for application, or even for evaluation or for creation. A simple stem along with 4 options, it forms a simple MCQ. In this particular, I'll pause for a moment so that you can all read this. May I request Sudeshna ma'am, can you just read out this for me if it is okay?
Sure, ma'am. Yeah, so we're giving a scenario in the source and we're asking some questions. It says a student looks at a piece of sandstone. The grains are well-rounded and made of quartz with no mica flakes present. They are frosted and stained rusty red. The grains are all about 1 mm in diameter and well sorted. In what environment was the sand most likely to have been deposited? So the children need to understand the environment from the information that is given in the STEM, right? The 4 options are beach, desert, glacier, and river.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And what are your thoughts about this question, simple MCQ? Any thoughts, any inputs?
So I think if children have an understanding or have read what kind of an environment has what kind of a sand, it is more of a recall remember question where they will be able to connect what they have learned in a particular context or a text and come to the answer here.
Exactly.
I'll just interject here, ma'am, and we have a huge audience who's watching us on YouTube. I'll take this opportunity to request them to post their questions on the YouTube live chat so that you can interact with the panel and you can get answers to any questions that you have. We are looking for meaningful questions and looking forward to resolving them for you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you. Next slide, please. Complex MCQs. Basically, these complex MCQs, they consist of 1, 2, 3, or 4 options in the STEM. And apart from that, these options A, B, C, D, they include any 2 or 3 correct statements. Either it can be 2 or it can be only 1, 2, 3, or more number of correct statements will be included. Generally, these complex MCQs, they can be very well compiled for analysis, application, as well as even for evaluation. And then next slide. Assertion reasoning questions. Assertion reasoning questions, basically, these are the questions consisting of 2 different statements. That means the learners should be able to evaluate the given statements independently to figure out the correct answer. And this type of reasoning questions consists of generally assertion, which includes the statement of fact, and a reason, that is explanation of the assertion. Learners need to determine whether each statement is correct. If both statements are correct, they must be able to determine whether the reason supports correctly the assertion, as well as 4 choices. That means these 4 choices are generally given consistently for all the assertion reasoning questions. Generally 4 to 5 assertion reasoning questions will be given. That means the percentage is very low. Can I ask Shweta ma'am, may I request you to throw some light on these assertion reasoning questions?
Yeah. So the rationale of including assertion reasoning questions is to provide students an exposure to different formats of questions. Also, it gives an opportunity to test creators, to item writers, to assess higher order skills through these questions. Now, one thing is very important, that when you write such questions, and you are creating one assertion and a reason, the assertion and the reason you should take care that these are not from two different aspects altogether. So for instance, if your assertion is from an area of, let's say, environmental education or the environmental aspect of science, your reason should not be from an area which is too widely apart from this. So the plausibility of the two statements being related to each other should be there. So this is also a very challenging format of questions to write and create. I would also request you to encourage your student to first look at the assertion separately, the reason separately, assess whether each of them are correct or incorrect, and then try to correlate with each other. It just takes some time, some practice to figure out these types of questions. And also, the number of these questions is going to be very few. So I think this is from me, Himlata ji.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your valuable inputs. Next slide, please. This is an example for this assertion reasoning question. Next slide. Yes, in this, that is example 2, let us take carbonic acid is a strong acid. That means this is a statement which is given. The child should be able to understand what are strong acids, what are weak acids, what happens to them when they, that is reason here it is given is it dissociates incompletely in water. That means what is dissociation, the theory of these acids and bases, the child should be aware before coming to the conclusion, and child should be able to correlate these two things, that is what is the statement which is given and whether the reason it is correct or not. If it is correct, which option he is supposed to take. Correlate between these two statements. Next slide. Case-based questions. The purpose of writing a case-based question, as already discussed by Shweta ma'am, generally in the form of multiple choice question for an activity, is to measure the learner's application of knowledge based on the desired results or based on the learning objectives of that particular activity. In this case-based question, generally a scenario is given. It should not be simple comprehension-based question as it was already given by Shweta ma'am. It should present learners with situation, that means beyond the textbook. Either it can be in the form of a narrative, either it can be in the form of a visual or data or figure or any newspaper report. And the questions should be based on the application of this particular area, whatever that is being asked. It should not be simply the content driven. And next slide. This is an example. Sweta ma'am, I would like to throw some light on this particular example in this case-based question.
So thank you, Himlata ji. I just want to add what you were saying is that when we create case-based questions, the reading load for the question should be limited. So as it is going to be an MCQ-based paper. So whatever material we give, if it can be presented in the form of a visual, in a form of some data, it will be more easily accessible to the learner. And whatever input or narrative or material which we give as a case, it should be valid. It should be purposive for the questions which follow. So this is what I want to say. And this example is from the sample question paper for class 12th. I'll request class 10th, sorry. So I'll request Himlata to just read the case and proceed with the questions, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your inputs. Noor, a young scientist, was trying to demonstrate some properties of light in her science project work. She kept X inside a box, as shown in the figure, and with the help of a laser pointer made light rays pass through the holes on one side of the box. She had a small butter paper screen to see the spots of the light being cast as they emerge. This is the case and the figure is given, and beautifully the questions they are constructed. I really appreciate the way they are constructed. What could be X she placed inside the box to make the rays behave as shown in the figure? That means the child will be able to understand, that means whether it is a lens or whether it is a mirror or prism or a plane mirror that is placed, so that how the rays they are emerged. It's such a wonderful construction. And the other question is, she measured the angles of incidence for both the rays on the left side of the box to be 48.6 degree. She knew the refractive index of the material of the object inside the box was given as 1.5. If one wanted to know the approximate value of the angle of refraction, it would be. That means here whatever that is given is the refractive index is given, angle of incidence, and then angle of refraction. These things, that means the basic calculations the child will be able to perform. This is a fantastic question for application analysis. Next slide, please. This also in continuation taken from the same case-based question. Noor, she asked her audience a few questions and noted down the main responses. These are the questions. And it is just like a complex multiple choice question in this particular case-based question where 5 options are given, and ABCD means these are nothing but group of these options, that is 1 and 2, 2 or 3, 3 and 4, 1, 2, 3 like this. This case, basically, it should be understandable to a student in that subject as well as at that particular level. The vocabulary, concepts, setting, and other aspects of the case should not rely on the knowledge or skill outside what the child may or may not be knowing at all. Highly relevant, basically, these case-based questions, they are highly relevant to what is being assessed. It should be relevant to what is being assessed for that particular standard. There should be strong alignment between the case and the subject outcomes, that is science learning outcomes which are being assessed. And more specifically, basically this case should set up the student to be assessed on the specific knowledge and skills the teacher or the particular assessment intends to target. The case also must contain enough information for a well-prepared student to successfully address the assessment. But it should not be, as Shweta ma'am mentioned, it should not be overloaded with the information or content. As far as possible, case should be authentic, and it should provide an opportunity to the students to introduce to real life situations as well as application of concepts. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next. This is a suggested style guide. That means while writing these items or while making any question paper, how we are going to write. The paper size, generally it should be A4 with portrait orientation, and margins, top and bottom margin of 2.5 centimeter, Arial font and 11 size. This basically it is a suggested style guide how we can use. That means the time format in physics or in any other this thing we need to use 12-hour clock, date, DDMM and YY format we need to use, and the diagrams basically should be referred as above or below with the title of the figure should be given. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. Assessment is the engine, as I already mentioned, which drives the students' learning. And as every learner's ability and progress is learning is unique, not all learners learn at the same pace. This competency-based education, it leads or aids all the learners to prepare and succeed in the real world. Now, may I request Gayatri ma'am to detail more about designing good quality questions. Over to you, Gayatri ma'am.
Gayatri, you'll need to unmute yourself. We can't hear.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Before we start, I think first of all, happy World Teachers Day. It's fantastic that on the World Teachers Day, I'm interacting with so many teachers. So, and I've been a teacher in my life at one point, so that's a different kind of joy. I will be talking on a part of today's webinar and will focus more on multiple choice questions and lead the presentation through more examples. I think we've heard Shweta ma'am and Himlata ma'am both, and both have covered the competency-based education and the blueprint part very well. Also, we've touched upon Bloom's taxonomy to just re-establish the understanding. when we start making questions, what is important for us is, term one itself would have multiple topics or chapters, but when you design an assessment, you have a smaller set of questions that you can put together. So it's important for us as teachers to understand that there are certain learning outcomes or learning topics that are important in terms of checking students' mastery, and hence they are more important to test, right? These are typically those concepts which are important to be endured or learned across grades. They are not specific to just one grade. So before we start making questions, having those learning outcomes identified is one of the important things that we must do, and that in a way supports the blueprint. Okay, quickly, I'm just pausing this slide here for all of us to understand the power of multiple choice questions and also some of the challenges it may, create for us. Linking it back to Shweta ma'am's presentation or Himlata ma'am's presentation, where we discussed those statements and understood that it can bring in a lot of insights when you use multiple choice questions. But since many of you must be creating these, but since this is really the first paper where we are going full MCQ based, it may take time, and we should be ready for that amount of time also to be invested. Okay, before I go to the next one, I know Sudeshna and I were discussing this morning, and Sudeshna had some questions for me. So Sudeshna, you want to really put those questions in? Yeah.
Right. So what I was thinking along this discussion, Gayatri, was there is a power to multiple choice questions. So how does a good question help? If we are able to help our audience understand that through some question examples, I think it would be a good understanding for them. So coming to this first question, I have two questions on the slide, right? One which simply asks the phase of the moon when it's completely round, and the other is asking about the reason why do we see different phases of moon. So what do you think of what these two are testing, and which is a good question and why?
Right. So I think thanks Sudeshna for also putting these questions for me together. Typically, when we look at this first question and try to put ourselves in the student's shoes, we can imagine that we only need a name. It's a very memory recall based question. If I know the name of that phase, I can immediately produce it and I'll get a correct answer, right? Very factual. I wouldn't even call knowledge based. It's just memory. And when I move to the second question, which is also based on the same concept of phases of moon, just the way the question's framed, asking you the reason of why phases occur in moon, that itself focuses on learning that the student must have had, and hence when even student tries to write the answer, there is a lot of thinking stimulation that goes in, right? Similarly,
right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Sudeshna, I also take a couple of more questions on those lines. There is one more set of questions. When I studied in school, maybe the first question was one of my favorite questions, right? You've remembered all the properties of solids, you go out and just write them down and you get full score. And then there is the second question, where me remembering the properties of a solid substance will be of very limited help. Because unless I've understood that there are strong intermolecular forces, less kinetic energy, and that the solids do not change shape with their containers because of those reasons, I'll find it difficult to answer the second question. And that's why designing a question in a certain way and also putting a layer of good options which help children think, and only those children who've understood the concept well can answer, is something that a good question does. So it in a way helps us as teachers, it helps us differentiate between real learning and something that is mechanically learned or remembered.
Also putting the context of a bottle in a solid thing is kind of testing for the students. Yes.
Correct. So basically also, like, I don't have to write 10 lines, right? So Deshna, it's just, if I've understood, I can simply, it may take more time as student for me to answer, but that makes it a more conceptual question. I have one more question, and I would like the participants to read it while I also focus on it. In the options, I've also put the performance for each of the options. And like you can see on the right bottom, around 13,000 students have actually taken this question, and the performance that we see is of from the actual data set. So just because we keep hearing these lines, right? Metals are good conductors, wood is a poor conductor, and these things are so kind of ingrained into us that moment there is a question that compares a metal and a wood, my tendency would be to choose metal as an answer as good conductor, because I'm like wired to think that way. Now, what this question does, it does not ask which one is a good conductor. It gives me a situation, and within a situation, it also has a couple of very specific details. First detail is this, these 3 spoons have been put in hot water, but for half a day. It's not say 5 minutes, 10 minutes, where the role of good or poor conductor can play out in terms of their temperatures. It's almost half a day that these are put, and the temperature is maintained throughout. The correct answer here is actually that all the spoons, irrespective of the substance they are made up of, would have almost similar temperature, just because they are in the same water bath. Now, also this question one, in a way, helps me understand the misconceptions that children have. It can also teach further. These questions help students understand that there are multiple factors that also impact a good and a poor conductor in terms of conduction of heat and temperature. Okay, Sudeshna, I have listed down, but would you like to kind of summarize it for us?
Yeah. So I think what the gist of what we discussed is how a good question, when it's created with an intent, with a clear testing objective, and with clarity, how it influences us to understand what students should learn, what is worth testing, how it stimulates students to think and move to higher learning thinking skills. And I think it answers questions from a lot of audience members who are already in the thought process of how can multiple choice questions test the create level of Bloom's domain. Also, easily helps us to distinguish between an apparent learning and a real learning that will endure for a longer period of time. When distractors are made very well researched or thought out, they can help us identify misconceptions and also target misconceptions in a way. And definitely, when we are talking about assessment of learning, we know that it gives a feedback of what students are learning. And we can maybe plan our instructional practices going further in that direction, right? That's what I captured out of this whole thing, Gayatri.
No, I think you've just put it like a great teacher. You've kind of assimilated this information and consolidated it in a wonderful way. Thank you for doing that. Let's move to the next part of it, which is the key principles that we need to keep in mind when we design a multiple choice question. And just to give you some initial guiding thoughts, I think a good question and a good multiple choice question is basically mainly 3 aspects under which all these key principles can be divided. One is context of the question, content of the question, and concept of the question, right? So 3 C's in a way. And what do we mean when we say context? So like we were discussing a while back, multiple topics that we cover, within each topic, we have multiple learning outcomes. And within a learning outcome, there are multiple learning areas, right? When I create a question, most probably I'm testing a micro concept or a very specific concept within that learning outcome. And for me to design a question that exactly tests it, linking it back to Shweta ma'am's point on validity, whether my question is valid and is it testing the same thing that it intends to test, I need to have a very clear testing objective, which is in a way going to guide me in making the question, providing the distractors, and making sure that I have the right question created to assess that particular topic. Second part is the content, and here content would be, again, we're discussing science, right? So science for us to bring science from facts and knowledge to this whole area of application and creation, basically we have to focus a lot on reasoning questions that are related to hypothesis formation, questions that are related to experimentation. And for all these things, we will need to have very specific scenarios, right? And these scenarios, again, in science, probably all the more, we will have to give all the specific details. We saw in some of the examples how presence or absence of specific details in a question can make a question poor or strong. So that is something that is a very key important ingredient of a question. And third is the concept. Now, when I say concept, all of us understand concepts. So I'm going to put a layer over it. Me understanding the concept as a question creator and me asking that is slightly different, right? I'll have to use appropriate language, appropriate for those grades, correct language, and it also has to be presented in a manner that my question's concept is conveyed to the student without any confusion. So I think these three are more like foundational needs of a good multiple choice questions. We will see more key principles in a more granular fashion as we move forward. Okay, now what we are going to have is on all the slides, you will see two examples. We will try and see what a poor or a badly designed question looks like, or a wrong question looks like, and how you can, overcome those gaps in a new question. So there is one example here, and I'm going to read out the stem for you. Take your own time to read the question with me on your chat. 5 grams of camphor is taken on a tray and burned. What is the weight of?
When we are using the term product, we are not very clear about what product we are talking about. So maybe you can give me more clarity on this.
Yeah. So exactly, very valid points, right? It tells me about product, doesn't say which product, the product that is left over as solid or product that got, evaporated due to sublimation. It also doesn't tell me whether the system in which it was put was a closed system or an open system, because all these factors are going to impact my my answer, right? So apparently okay looking question when you actually, that's why also I think one of the ideas that I want to push all of us to think of is whenever a question is created, we need a fresh set of eyes to also review the question, because when we are in the flow of creating question, we may miss out certain details, but only during the practices of review and discussion on questions, we will realize that the questions can be improved further. I have put another example here, which is more real life and is very specific. So the camphor one was also very real life, but this side, something is really all of us have seen in our kitchens, right? And the way it asks options is also something that promotes further thinking. I'm not going to read the question just because of the nature of the webinar where we have limited time. But what this question does is I would typically want you to focus for a while on options A and C, because both the options are addressing different misconceptions that can be brought out. And ultimately, the correct answer, which is option B. Of course, option B is also a strong option, but A and C bring out very strong misconceptions associated with weight, volume, and shape. I'll pause for a few seconds before we move forward.
Right. I think the image gives the question a different dimension.
Yes, Sudeshna, thanks for also, pointing that out. Imagine this question without the image, and maybe I'll have to literally visualize these things in my mind, right? So there's a very specific role that images play in questions, especially when they're appropriately utilized.
Or they would have given a detailed description of the packets, which would be a lot of cognitive load for the students.
True. Let's move to the next question. Okay, another question. I'm going to read out the stem just to for all of us to be together. Raghav used new refill P, while Amina used new refill Q to write a long essay. Both of them wrote the same number of words in the essay before their refills ran out of the ink. Based on the information, which of the following statements is most likely to be true? And then you have 4 options that you can read at your pace. Now, if I notice this question, and you can see the picture, very nice, clear picture, the question is also good, right? It helps me understand, helps the student reason and arrive at the correct answer. The only problem with this question is how many students have we seen who would write different essays or will write their essays and have the same number of words, right? So it's a very contrived situation. And that's where maybe just bringing a bit of a change in the question can make the question actually very specific and real. We've changed it from writing an essay to copying a passage. Now, when 2 people copy the passage, number of words don't change, right? So very small changes, but the questions become more authentic, real life, and less contrived or kind of, this whole makeshift that we create around situations at times. That can be avoided. Third, I'll just load both these questions together. I think this point also takes it back to the point of reliability on question also in a way, because some of these groups, we have, diversity of students, right? There's a rich diversity. And so these questions that you see on the slide can give an edge to some students who may have familiarity or may have a relative in the field of science, or someone who's been seeing idli being cooked day in and day out in their homes. May seem like a very small thing, us being urban, but in rural India, there are regions where people are not aware of food beyond their staple food, right? So just avoiding any such situation which gives an undue advantage or deprives a particular group from arriving at the correct answer would be useful to do.
Absolutely.
Yes. Spend a couple of minutes reading this. Actually, a couple of minutes. Okay, let me read.
I think you could make it easier for them by showing them how it can be made easier for the students also.
Yeah, I'm also still going to make it difficult. Okay, and this is exactly what Sudeshna was talking about, right? A question with so many facts, so much of cognitive load. I'm like literally, is it a science paper or a language paper? Am I doing reading comprehension, right? Because I'm literally creating this structure of rainforest in my mind. And then after that, I'm arriving at my options to actually even process the answers. So this can be changed by just putting an image. We removed around 3, 4, 5 sentences from the question just by putting an appropriate, neatly designed figure, which explains that part, which otherwise 5, 6 statements comprehension would have taken. So mindfully utilizing images, when we use images, using appropriate images, like where to use line drawings, where to use pictures. I think those are important aspects of questions. I think towards the end, Shweta ma'am will touch upon those points.
Gayatri, I have one thing to add here. I was just thinking that if we pose this, say, as a 30th question in a paper of 50 questions, would I be reading it? I wouldn't probably, because I'm already tired by then. So this giving a visual at this point in time in any question number, I think, makes better sense.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Right? Cognitive load at any age, whenever we can, it's load, so it must be avoided. So yeah, it's useful. Okay, one more example, and it has a nice picture and simpler questions, but a very interesting idea, right? Very interestingly, checking the fact of understanding of convex and concave. I have a picture drawn, and then there is a surface, and on the surface there's reflection with the on the basis of which students have to respond. Good question, okay question, bad question. What do you think? In the webinar, thinking can still continue, right? So you can think yourself. Okay, one little problem with this question. The only problem is I can see the edge of the glass here. And just because of that, I have an answer now. I know the answer. I don't really have to understand the question anymore. So a small gap like this can actually, in a way fail our question. Look at this thing, simple thing. All of us use computers so much. Crop the image a bit so that no cues are there for the student. So you're bringing the student back from getting cues from the picture to actually arriving at the conceptual reasoning and finding the answer out, right? So very small things like these can just make your question invalid or can become a great insightful question. Yes, I'm not going to read this question. Basically, the idea is whenever we have questions, and many of our questions have situations where we use names, make sure that we have both genders and religions represented almost uniformly equally, right? So you can see the examples. The left example has most of the names as women, except for the one who's asking. And most probably they are from the same religion. On the other side, I have a set of names, both male, female, genders equally represented, along with different religions. I think this also makes our questions and our assessments more inclusive in its own way. Absolutely. Yeah. Sudeshna, feel free to give me a time check whenever, because right now I want to see any time.
You have around 10 more minutes max.
I'll quickly go through a couple of examples.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give both the examples now because, again, you can read the question, but the point that I'm making here is when I have a question like this, where I have situations which I have to link back to a given picture or data set, and then process information to arrive at a question, giving a fill in the blank kind of a question or leaving half sentence for the student to fill in the answer is slightly is advisable, right? So what happens in this case is I have just on the first left hand side question, what you can see is based on the picture shown, the red ball is, and then the student has no clue of what they're supposed to answer. They have to go to options and come back to the diagrams and then see what is it that is fitting in, versus just a minor tweak. I'm not changing any facts, I'm changing nothing. The only thing that I'm changing here is the way I'm asking the question. What can we conclude about the red ball from the picture shown? So now the students already know that they're supposed to look at the red ball. The reference point is established, and now they're going to process the question more quickly and in a more focused way. So this type of question in a way directs students towards their answer, right? And that's a little more convenient. So that's a suggestion that we generally make. Typically, I think second suggestion, I'm going to again go through this quickly because most of us have heard about this and know this very well, is to avoid negative phrasing in our questions. And double negative, definitely please do not use. The bottom question, the lower question, if you focus on option C, that itself explains why such questions should be avoided. The yield reaches a certain value which does not increase even when the amount of fertilizer applied is increased, right? That's a very complex statement. The maize plants produce grain even if no fertilizer is applied. So can be made really simplified, and even if I'm using a negative situation or phrasing, I can minimize it by bringing it to the question for higher grades, like the top question. Right. Okay, again, two questions here. I'm going to go through this a bit quickly because thoda we know about it already. The top question, there are 4 facts and all 4 facts are correct, but none of the facts is correct for the given question, right? And so there is no correct answer to this question. And the second question, what I have is more than 1 correct answers. All 3 in a way, the chromosomes, DNA molecules, and the nucleus. All these 3 things carry genetic information. Now, I may come back fighting if I'm a question maker and say, no, I meant DNA, but that is something that I had in mind, right? I can't go back and decide how student kind of interprets this question. So there is a gap, or there is a scope to interpret, subjectively, and such questions should be avoided. Clear one correct answer. Okay, this is something, reading load ho gaya, that also, plus the way it looks like aesthetically also. If you see, this question has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words repeated across all 4 options. A shadow is formed when light is blocked by an object, and a shadow is formed when is repeated across options. The way I can design it can minimize it. There will be scenarios where I'll have to repeat the words. I have in the second, the right hand side question, I have when repeated, but one, it is not unduly repeated. Also, there is the situation demands for this word. So just making sure that we don't have redundancy in our options, and that way also we can take care of the reading load. Second option, second question is the second principle on this slide is also, if you look at the options here, the order of options is slightly haywire. Right? My option C is a bit longer as compared to all the others. I think generally when students are not very sure of the concept, they try to play this, elimination or selection games, and anything that is standing out for them, they're likely to pick it. So even if most students select a particular option, you wouldn't be sure if it's coming out of a misconception or there is some other reason. So arranging options in a certain order, generally ascending or descending, can one in reading also, that's more convenient, and trying to keep option length almost similar is something that we generally suggest. Yes. I'm going to skip a couple of examples. This is also subset thing like DNA that I shared. What is happening here is the answers, there is more than correct answer, one answer, because the answers are subsets of each other for the situation given. So unless there is one clear correct answer and all 3 other answers, or what we call distractors, are completely wrong, the insights coming from the question would not be reliable, and the question would become invalid. Quickly on the testing objective, since we discussed about even when I try to write this question, I know that I'm not checking the understanding of gravity on moon through the left-hand side question. For me to check that, I'll need to design something different. And that's something that's given on right side. So automatically the question which check for memory or rote learning, even while you are the creator of those questions, you will start rejecting those if you have clear testing objective in front of you. Okay, option order, I think we've discussed. I've still put some additional things to be taken care of here. When you use years, they have to be in chronological order. When you use numbers, you use ascending. If you're checking numbers, maybe there is flexibility too. But generally, that helps in the way student processes information and reads the question.
Yeah,
okay.
so I have a load of information coming from you and from everyone. And I'm sure there are a lot of challenges that would come in when teachers sit to make these MCQs.
Yeah.
A few of them I am able to immediately talk of is, number one, it will take a lot of time. Making a very good MCQ would be taking a lot of time. Second, I'm afraid if I'm trying to make a case-based question, I might end up checking reading comprehension instead of the scientific understanding of the student. And also, maybe I bring up an absolutely beautiful stem, an absolutely beautiful context. But then when I'm making the question in itself, I'm not able to frame a good question. I end up making a very simple question, which might not require that context, which I have framed so beautifully. And I just can give it as a standalone question, right? So we have, Gayatri, maybe a maximum of 2 to 3 minutes to discuss this. If
1
it's
minute
okay
per
with
challenge.
you.
I think since Sudeshna
Yes.
is raised, let's cover them quickly. So
Yes.
I'll cover 3 main challenges that Sudeshna also mentioned. I frankly, I mean, I know, but I would ask us to look at it differently, right? It is challenging to create multiple choice questions in terms of time. It takes a lot of time. It does require multiple iterations. And I put one question, which is in a way a simple statement. If I look at the textbook, a simple statement that says, any object which is illuminated can also reflect light, right? So that's what I'm checking here. And a direct question could have taken maybe a few seconds for me to type down or write down, and versus this question, where a lot of thought process has gone in, and this definitely takes time. What this does in return to me is, if you look at region 1, region 2, and region 3, all these 3 regions are picked from different areas, a couple of them which are directly illuminated, one which is partially in shadow and partially in light. And with that, I'm checking this particular conceptual understanding. So to come up with this question, I think one is it takes time. Second thing that I also, from my experience of question making, I think these scientific phenomena are not something that we discover, right? It's happening. Like someone must have seen this while they must be walking the road, one of our question creators, and he or she just picked it. So I think just staying aware as science teachers, I think we keep saying, no, science is not about blackboard, it's about field. So it's actually like that. Can we just look around? And there are so many ideas that we can, and then maybe question making is not such an arduous task, right? Because I start taking ideas from nature. But yes, in the initial phase, when we are getting accustomed to higher order thinking type MCQ questions, it does take time. But the results are worthwhile, because you don't only just know what's correct and what's incorrect, or what your students know or do not know. You actually end up understanding what the students who do not know this concept, what are the wrong notions that they have. And during my classroom instruction now, how do I kind of address those notions, right? So the whole classroom interaction becomes very rich on the basis of these results. Quickly, the second one, yes, we end up designing poor items, and we saw so many examples, right? And often such, even especially in science, right? If I'm not using appropriate language or not realizing how I'm framing it, I may just end up making a reading comprehension question. The question here is like that. If I focus on this particular statement in the stem below the image stem part, it takes more time to slide down a slide with a longer slope. That gives me the answer already. If I know sentence comprehension, I know the answer. I don't need to know physics for this, right? So yes, when you make the question, all of us are likely to make these questions, but maybe going back to questions, revisiting, giving it to fresh set of eyes is something important. And yes, we were discussing about contrived situations. We may have a nice start to the question. If you see here, I'm linking the question to osmosis, and it, filtered and unfiltered, and then bringing it to blood and water. But in the end, I'm checking a very trivial fact, okay, which is the organ that removes waste material from blood and recovers water. That's all that I'm wanting to ask actually in this question. But for that, I've just put this situation together. So being very mindful of, actually, when you want to design higher order questions, it's not about length of the question, it's about the situation of the question, and consciously keeping away from testing trivial information with higher cognitive load is something that that is a challenge. In the initial phase, we may end up making more questions like this, but I think question making is a journey, and the practice has to go on for years together. Yeah, Sudeshna, anything else that you want me to cover?
No, I think we've beautifully summed up that, yes, we need to, the whole idea that Shweta ma'am had posed at the beginning, that we need to make rote learning or memorization irrelevant, and need to move into competency-based education. Shweta ma'am, there are a few questions from the audience, if you would like to answer some of them. I'll quickly give you an idea. So there are questions regarding what are the resources that teachers can use for case-based questions. Is there a fixed resource named by CBSE?
Okay, so
Yeah.
creating case-based questions, as we have been saying right from the beginning of this webinar, is actually a very creative exercise. And there can't be any particular defined resource set to work on with. So from the CBSE's perspective, we say that through case-based questions, we are trying to expose our students to unfamiliar situations which are beyond our textbook per se. However, the concepts should necessarily be a part of our curriculum. So these contexts can be, these situations can be either a data set, it can be a doctor prescription, it can be some recipe from a nutritionist for a particular patient, it can be a newspaper article. But I also believe that this data, this information, this narrative, this material has to be adapted to the situation. So maybe we can't just pick up the newspaper clipping as it is and create questions from it. We'll have to adapt it, we'll have to modify it, remove the redundant portions, make it more comprehensive and useful for the questions which are being asked. So it is a very, very creative exercise. It is a very thoughtful exercise. And I would encourage all the teachers to sit together in groups and work. So peer review is essentially very important for this whole process.
I
would
can
they
add
need this kind
point.
of, okay, yes,
I can
please,
fully add.
continue.
Maybe the research papers, right? Research
Yes.
papers would have simple and complex analyzed data, and maybe some of those can work as great case question materials too, and not necessarily be pick very complex data sets, right? A
Yes.
simpler table
Yes.
can be a great way.
Yes. Correct.
Just to add to this, Shweta ji, is there a copyright on or something attached to this? If you can just maybe.
Largely, see, we have to be very conscious about the material which we are using. It should be copyright free. Usually for educative purposes, there is people permit the use of their material. However, we need to necessarily quote the source. For some simple visuals, very often we can recreate those visuals also. For instance, a situation where some activity is being done in chemistry, we can simply create a set of apparatus. So I think for these areas, our teachers are quite adept, and we should use our skills of writing and making diagrams to help us support this. So I think, but once again, we have to be very conscious and very cautious, especially in terms of picking up questions from other websites and material and reproducing them. I think that's not an idea which I will encourage. We can definitely take some sort of inputs. I've just given you one resource which we have at the CBSE website. We have huge series of question banks. We have questions which have been contributed by EI. We have questions that have been created by international experts. Alpha Plus material is there. So please go ahead and access those. They are for all the classes, at least for science, mathematics, and English reading from classes 6 to 10th. I'm sure they will be extremely useful for you.
Right. I think you in the process also addressed another question where they were asking that how much can they deviate from the NCERT curriculum when they're making these case-based questions. And you said that the concept has to be there and they can choose unfamiliar context. There is a question about, is the level of knowledge imparted at class 10 CBSE at par? How are we looking at it at par with the global curriculum?
I think this is a very typical question, and it merits a lot of deliberation. I think at our level as well as
Presentation with the schools. Is it
so
possible?
the video will be available in the CBSE YouTube channel. Anybody can go and revisit it. As far as the presentations, I will have to check whether we can upload it in our resource pool on the CBSE website. The guideline for creating multiple choice questions. In fact, we have two things on this. One is a handbook for item writing, which we have developed in collaboration with Azim Premji University and Central Square Foundations. So I think within the next week, we will be uploading it, this handbook for all our teachers to access on the CBSE academic website. Besides that, EI has supported us in creating a set of guidelines, this very simplified version, which covers all the critical areas. And I think a large part of the presentation also would be a part of this. So we will definitely wind that up, finalize that document and upload it for everybody.
Sure, ma'am. You can summarize this. No?
Yeah, so thank you. So I think today's webinar, I look at it as an opportunity to start a discussion, start reflection on what competency-based education means for us as teachers and educators, how we should align our questions for competency-based education, how slowly we need to move away from rote memorization and focus more on skills which are important for our subject, be it the science process skills, be it the skills of designing an experimental situation, or whatever we consider from the perspective of a particular discipline. So we have tried to touch upon various aspects. Of course, this cannot be an instant solution to all your woes. We can't probably say that we have taught you how to create good quality items. This is a process. This is a journey which you will have to take on your own along with your peers and friends. To conclude, I would like to thank my co-panelists, all the experts, Gayatri ji, Sudeshna ji, Himlata ji, the other team, the background team from EI, officers and experts from the CBSE. I will start on a note of gratitude for our chairman, the leader of our organization, who has been asking us to think beyond the box, Director Academics, Director Trainings, Controller of Examination, Chaudhary sir, who makes it a point to join these webinars and encourage us. My colleagues at the CBSE Academic Unit, Dr. Pragya Singh, Hilal ji, Pushkar sir, the team which has put together this webinar, Manish ji, and the IT team, Sudesh ji, and your complete people who are supporting you. And of course, the teachers who have been flooding the chat box with so many valuable feedback and comments. We absolutely feel gratified and encouraged. And we realize that we are working in the right direction. We are looking for the larger good of our students when we move and bring in these reforms and changes slowly but surely. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you so much.
You want me to